Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our IT at Cork Cybersecurity Tech Talk, which is kindly sponsored by Ernst & Young. My name is Laura Hughes, and I'm a Programme Manager at Cloudera and a board member of IT at Cork, and I'm delighted to be your MC today. So I have a background in cybersecurity myself, and it's a fascinating field. Great to be able to say that I played my part in beating the bad guys of cybercrime. I'm sure our panelists today will say that indeed we all need to play our part. So today's webinar is the second event in our cybersecurity series, and we have a very exciting lineup of experts panelists today. So during this panel session, the speakers will be discussing cybersecurity in depth while sharing their different thoughts, skills, and knowledge on cybersecurity. So our panelists include Mr. Dave McCormack, Principal Engineer at McAfee Enterprise. He's given a wave there. And we've got Andy Gresh from CTO at SmartTech 247. We've got Ross Spellman, Cybersecurity Director at Ernst & Young. And we've got Deepak Bodhiraja, a Senior Manager of Cybersecurity and Risk Services at Ernst & Young. Thank you to you, the audience, for joining us today. Please do submit your questions on the Q&A panel, and we'll allow time at the end to address these. So, on behalf of IT at Cork, I would like to thank our sponsors again, Ernst & Young. I'd like to thank the Tech Talk Organising Committee and indeed our panel members for their time. So let's get the panel started and see how deep the cybersecurity rabbit hole really goes. So Ross, I'd like to start with you and ask you an open-ended question that I hope the others will join into. How has the threat landscape changed in recent years?
So, hi Laura, great to be here and great to be on the panel. Absolutely. So the threat landscape has changed, particularly in the last 2 years since the dawn of the pandemic. What threat actors are looking to do and the tools, tactics, techniques they're using have changed quite radically. Also, we've had remote work for a very long time now as well. So it's just interesting how the scale and just the scale of the opportunity seen by cyber criminals is just different, puts a different lens on it. And the value of going beyond the perimeter, beyond perimeter controls from a cyber threat actor's perspective and looking at it through the kill chain, much easier to compromise the user at home than it is to compromise the user within the perimeter, the traditional perimeter, which again was also kind of slowly disappearing, but within the traditional perimeter of an organization. And this goes through enterprise security rather than cybersecurity. So it's those two, looking at the holistic view of the individual and taking a user-centric view of security. Cyber criminals are targeting the user beyond the perimeter at home, and they're choosing their end users quite specifically. So targeting whaling and targeting spear phishing users at home. So taking advantage of higher risk behaviors and then was exploiting, compromising, ultimately organizations' assets. So increased threat activity in ransomware, obviously we've seen, and not even the increase of it, but the sophistication of what's happening. So we saw during the summer, obviously the HSC attack. We've seen numerous others examples locally, but globally as well. I think since the dawn of the pandemic, since the, I suppose, the targeting of non-traditional enterprises such as OT environments in manufacturing and power and utilities companies are very now much in the lens of the threat actor groups as well. They've seen what they can get in terms of ransom from these companies as well. So things like DDoS has kind of increased as well, but not to the same extent, or not to the same from a brand perspective, from an external exposure perspective, and being in the media has heightened sensitivity. So the thing about ransomware obviously is it's about generally six or seven steps, and considered in isolation, organizations won't be strong. So if you take phishing, for example, so training and awareness to improve your company and your end users' awareness of things like phishing or identifying potentially fraudulent emails and so on, or potentially something hiding malware. Like that's always a good first step and so on, but then there's the 7 or 8 steps afterwards, including the lateral movement, the kind of elevated privileges. All of those steps need to be taken thereafter. So it's not just looking at one of these kind of threat types, it's looking at the multiple layered approach. And again, that Lockheed Martin kill chain is a very good way of looking at what a threat actor will do. So protecting users from home is critical, because ultimately the perimeter is gone. and organizations need to take a much more user-centric focus on security. So I think we're at the time of the year now where everybody's doing their shopping. Black Friday last week and Cyber Monday. There's a lot of kind of increased shopping being done by on corporate assets, where traditionally, even 6 years ago, you might have turned off your laptop, gone home and opened up your home, your personal laptop. Everything is merged into one. The higher risk behaviors are happening on company assets, and that results in exposures, and that's easy to exploit for cyber criminals. And I think the simple practical steps, obviously awareness and so on, but the technical controls have changed as well. So protecting the user is now much more of a focus than protecting the enterprise. By protecting the user, you are protecting the enterprise. So it's that kind of view. So increased threat activity and ransomware, increased prevalence of things like DDoS attacks. Hacktivism is on the increase as well, because strangely enough, there's a lot of working from home. There's a lot of attempted, I suppose, there's a lot of time for script kiddies and hacktivists to kind of try exploits and see what they can do against a company's perimeter, when their belief is the monitoring detective capability is lessened as well. So again, it's an exponential growth in kind of threat activity, and phishing campaigns as well. It's absolutely exponentially increased in the amount of registered, I suppose, new registered new fish email types from new and as well as domains. So unprecedented time from threat activity, unprecedented time in the size and scale, but for us, I think it's the sophistication of what we're seeing from a malware perspective as well. It's almost untraceable, to the point of they're covering their tracks. They're using, I suppose, smoke screens, and they're also they're using kind of fake footprinting in some of their malware identification. So even to identify an APT group is becoming much more difficult today than it was even 6 or 7 years ago. So a big challenge, and a big challenge requires, I suppose, some of the professionals that are on the call today, including yourself. So again, it's a big challenge. But I'll open up to the group. Are they seeing the same thing? And particularly Deepak on our team is specialized obviously in security architecture, but also threat intelligence, and we'll have some good insights there as well. One thing I would just like to say is we're very focused on the threat landscape. What we might take our eye off is the actual technological change that's coming as well, or is already occurring. Obviously, the prevalence and increased use of cloud, and the dawn and advancement of AI, and the challenges for that, 5G, and also what's coming down the road with quantum computing. So the technological change will also introduce a significant amount of risk, and all of this significant risk is opportunities for cyber criminals. So we're going through a pandemic, and we're seeing these kind of tactical pieces, these tactical shifts. There's a seismic shifts coming down the lines of technological changes that are occurring as well. So I'll open it up to the group, or pass back to yourself, Laura, to expand on that. But that would be my take on unprecedented increase in threat activity, and we're almost taking our eye off the ball potentially, and what's coming down the road from a technical perspective would be what we're seeing.
Yeah, this is Andy here. Very first, I would echo pretty much what you say is what we see in the threat landscape at the moment. Ransomware activity, multi-warheaded attacks. It's very important. Lots of people don't understand that just because you evaded some small bit of it, something is lingering maybe in your network. Botnet activity in the last couple of weeks, again, going crazy, TrickBot and so on. But what I find very interesting to watch, the amount of breaches happening matching to geopolitical situations is also quite interesting. When you see the ping pong play between Biden and Russia, for example, we saw a summer break this year that we haven't seen before in attacks. And it felt a little bit like the Russians said, like, give Biden a break before he gets a heart attack, so to say. And I think this will be something very important that we have to focus on to see what's happening in the future also with this, because it's not only the organizations that get attacked by ransomware. We see more and more open discussion, more and more open acknowledgement that nation states are attacking each other. And unfortunately, that brings us into a war zone. That means we, the citizen of each state, are getting impacted also by that. So cyber becomes more and more political, because we're going out of the offense and the defense with lots of countries. And that means not necessarily I'm worried about their capabilities, but I'm worried about the capabilities of their opponents. And that will make our life probably way more tricky in the years to come, because everybody that works in cybersecurity, when they worked and did vulnerability scanning, and in the early stages did the first vulnerability scan, for example, on OT, which is a big target vector now. You might have seen a normal Nmap could bring down an OT environment, because it's just how things happening sometimes. You know, when you start out the first time, you don't understand it, you come with the IT mindset in. This is now years and years ago, over 10 years ago, that something I've seen live happening in Ireland. I know it was a bit scary. But the interesting part really here is these tools are available to our pen testers, but that means also the same tools are available to the attackers, because Kali Linux is open available, Metasploit is open available, and so on. But the difference is, they do the same than our pen testers, because they're trying to improve their attack techniques. And that makes it also scary about the technologies that we use. How do we protect against it? What is the next step of protection? A big topic, I think, in the next years will be, for example, Linux. Because we're talking always about malware and files and everything. But the attackers moving more and more into the memory of the systems. So then they're becoming fileless. They just become executables that live in the system and disappear. Linux systems are probably way more vulnerable to this, because we have no real technology to protect Windows. Maybe anybody in the here want to jump on this a little bit, because what I see, for example, is we have the classic Windows protection. The Mac OS protection is okay-ish. Now, everybody that uses Mac is safe, so to say. It's not really true, but Linux, and especially with more and more people trying to find cheaper solutions and going to Linux desktops, for example, they are so packed with feature richness and open source that we open the doors to vulnerabilities dramatically.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting when you talk about Linux is, of course, with the advent of WSL, right, Windows Subsystem for Linux, which, for those who don't know, is a technology that Microsoft have developed to essentially allow you to run Linux applications unmodified as is. It's literally a virtual Linux running under Windows, but in a way that's far more tightly integrated than a traditional VM would be. And what it means is that you can, that becomes an entirely new vector, essentially, because it's always dangerous to generalize, but I suspect most of the cybersecurity vendors have a bit of a blind spot when it comes to WSL, because it's actually quite a difficult thing to get visibility into. So yeah, Linux is definitely a challenge in terms of how things are changing. Another thing that occurred to me as Ross was speaking was, a potential platform shift that's now underway, a hardware platform shift underway, which is from x86 to ARM. So, Microsoft have got massively behind ARM. They're working very, very closely with Qualcomm in driving the evolution of Windows on the ARM platform. And I know for certain that the major cybersecurity vendors, do not have parity when it comes to ARM and x86. I mean, they have 25 years experience understanding, the shape of executable images for x86 and all that goes with that. I guess we don't have that when it comes to ARM. And you can say that, well, maybe a modern security system needs to be looking at behaviors and TTPs rather than at the actual artifacts like files and things like that. And that is very true. But at the same time, there's no getting away from it that analysis of static artifacts like executable files and things is still a very important part of security platforms. So yeah, there are a lot of challenges. I fully agree with everything Andy and Ross have said.
It's interesting, Dave, just on that the heuristics, the importance of heuristics, both from an end user perspective, so from an interaction perspective, but also from a system and service perspective, looking at behaviors, and that's become much more, I suppose, prevalent than the signature-based kind of mechanism to detect kind of anomalies. Much more the behavior, because the sophistication of this stuff is just it's just advancing so quickly that it needs to be actually much more centered on a particular process and activity. So you're getting right down into what is actually happening right under the hood, being able to identify. I think the challenge is that with security and even detective controls, it increases obviously the process or intensity or what's required to actually deal, even from a power and power consumption perspective. So what you can layer on top of that. So it's definitely the view between taking the risk by freeing things up. So Linux by its very nature is quite open and free, and then Microsoft quite locked down in comparison. But even taking that view of how to kind of look at a much more almost containerized view and looking at a much more process-centered way of kind of detecting anomalies and detecting kind of, I suppose, something that's potentially or a lot of events that could be could lead to or could be an indicator of compromise, an indicator of security incidents.
Yeah,
sure.
The sort of shift to thinking about behaviors and things like that is an interesting one, because it all of a sudden becomes very non-deterministic, right? I mean, if you have old school detection based on a malicious, a known malicious signature, that's easy, right? You see it, it's bad, kill it, block it, whatever. Behaviors, it's not so black and white, because I mean, frequently things that are completely benign exhibit behaviors that are characteristic of something malicious. And it means therefore that you know, I guess the risk of false positive is significantly higher. I know there's one security company that we had a conflict with one time for one particular customer, and when I looked, we were essentially detecting that product as malicious. And when I looked at what it was doing, its behavior was, when I analyzed what it was doing, its behavior was indistinguishable from malware. I mean, it was essentially downloading encrypted script from the internet and executing it. I was like, you know, how am I supposed to differentiate between that and malware? You know, so yeah, it's very challenging, but you know, it's very challenging to make that pivot to detection based on behavior. But at the same time, it's vital that we do, because the old school way of doing it simply just doesn't cut it anymore. But the other thing then, and I will finish very soon, I promise. The other thing is, because there are shades of uncertainty when it comes to behavioral detection, it means that unfortunately there is a need for humans in the loop. And I know when we were discussing this amongst ourselves last week, that's something that I kind of feel strongly about. Unfortunately, you know, you do need to have security professionals in organizations, people who understand what they're looking at in a threat event log or their EDR console or whatever it is. The idea that you can just install a security product from a reputable vendor on your machines and then be safe, unfortunately, that's not true, you know, and I think that's something that businesses need to understand and need to plan for accordingly, you know.
And the other thing is very important. Sorry, I just finished the sentence up and then I need you go deeper, because we're talking all the time. But there's a very important point that you made there, and that's what is the biggest threat? It's always, we say, humans. At the moment, one of the biggest threats that ACS as humans is not only our behavior, but the lack of qualified security people. We get a load of people from universities and colleges. They did really great courses. It's nothing about the courses, but they don't have the basics of IT. And people need to understand cybersecurity is a specialization in the whole area of computing. If it is cloud computing, so for example, we see the mainframes, as we discussed earlier in our chat, in your background, Dave, but we're going back to mainframe, so to say. Cloud is mainframe. We have only devices that connect through the SaaS services. Everybody said cloud is easy. Cloud is not easy when you want to secure it or architect it correctly, because it is not the same, a copy of the infrastructure that you have in your office. It's a different thing. It's a different shared model of threat. Now you have other people in it. You have supply chain and everything. So you need people that are very good understanding technology, very good in traditional IT still, because it's still networking. It's still all the good old stuff. You need people with Linux knowledge. You need people with Microsoft knowledge. Then you need to have cloud knowledge. And on top of that comes then the whole compliance part. So, I mean, you take that, this is not one person. This is 2-3 people that work together as a team to make this happen. And I think that is a cost factor and a risk factor to us, because a lot of people still underestimate what it means to be a cybersecurity professional. And this is what's happening in our country. This is all our countries in Europe. This is hurting our businesses, and it is also confusing young people that come into the profession because they see only cybersecurity, big dollar sign in their eyes. It's the toughest business in my mind in IT because nobody has a budget. So don't dream of the big dollars unless you're really good. And the other bit is, if you're not up to scratch on the basics, you're no good to an organization because you may be the best person to install a software that does half the work for you, but the other half, where it comes into understanding and diving into the systems, if you don't have that up to scratch, you're the biggest danger, because you just come in with half knowledge.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I think Deepak is there as well. So Deepak would be probably a good example of what you're saying, that kind of unicorn with the kind of the infrastructure view, the kind of security lens, and then the risk and compliance lens. Deepak, do you have a view on that just from the risk side as well as kind of on top of the infrastructure?
Yeah, Ross, thanks for that. And probably before we jump onto the risk side, what we were discussing initially, and what Dave and Andy mentioned, that the focus is still on, like, let's say, Windows systems or specific erstwhile legacy systems that we say, or the operating systems. Like for Windows, we do have Patch Tuesdays, but the focus to secure Linux systems or the new technology or spare that is coming in, that is very limited these days. And that's where the security professionals need to focus to make sure that right security tools are implemented, right processes are implemented, and we do have kind of right mechanism to secure the other technologies that are in the ecosystem, because it's not normally what we have seen across different organization is more focused towards securing the Windows systems or the end user systems, but heart of their kind of technology or their business operations are also kind of supported by Linux systems, which could be hosting their databases or key critical applications, which are always kind of left ignored, or they are still not focusing as much as they are focusing on Windows system. And that opens a big gap in their ecosystem. And same goes with most of the network devices. We have seen that in last year as well, what happened with the Solaris attack. And that was the thing. People could go and, because the key risk around this is attackers are looking for the smallest opportunity that is available in your entire infrastructure and which one they can exploit. So they can use kind of different mechanism around that. And that's why the risk is continuously increasing, because what their key motive is to kind of try to find that one backdoor or one small loophole within your overall infrastructure and try to get in and then exploit different kind of areas which they can do within the system.
Yeah, the Linux one I find is always interesting because it's like a black box that it kind of almost, look, we can't put AV on it, so there's nothing we can do. Whereas they don't look at the kind of layered controls you can put around it, from network segmentation right through the stack around access controls and so on. So I think the Linux one is always a funny one when we see those kind of legacy, particularly in OT environments, where they might be used for something that's kind of obscure, that isn't fully known by the infrastructure guys, yet alone the security guys. So I think it is that awareness, Andy and Deepak, that you're speaking of, to right through the technology stack to get those kind of, as you're saying, what I call unicorn kind of security people that are kind of understand the infrastructure, understand the risk and compliance lens, but then understand, I suppose, how to deploy the right controls to improve upstream and downstream.
It's interesting you mentioned like not being able to put AV on Linux and that. And I guess what's interesting there is, maybe we need to, talk about the difference between protection products and EDR products, and I mean, there's been a bit of a shift for the benefit of folks who've joined us who maybe don't, aren't as immersed in this as the panelists. Traditionally, you try to protect an endpoint being a computer, right? Whether it's physical or virtual, you try to protect it. So you try to literally block a threat from doing something. And that still plays a role, but increasingly what's important is recognizing that you're not going to be able to block everything. You're not going to be able to protect against everything. So what you try and do is you try and detect when something has happened after the fact and then respond to it. And that whole category of products is called EDR, Endpoint Detection Response Products. And what you can do, of course, with Linux is, you know, you can deploy EDR products, EDR infrastructure on or EDR products on your Linux infrastructure is what I'm trying to say. And EDR is something that I think really maybe, particularly in small, you know, SMEs, really hasn't you know, become a thing yet. You know, and it needs to be, because the traditional protection products just on their own essentially don't cut it anymore. You know, and the difficulty with an EDR product is you need a human at the end. You need somebody, you know, who's looking at the alerts that are raised, that's doing the investigation, that's, you know, doing all of that the response side of things. And I guess that requires employees, and, you know, SMEs, you know, potentially don't have the resources for a 24/7 staffed security operations center. And that's, I guess, then where they need to start looking at using the services of an MSSP, a managed security services provider. But EDR is vital in the modern threat landscape. At least that's my take. I'm biased because I'm an EDR architect with my employer, but EDR is vital. I'd be interested to hear the view of the other panelists on the importance of EDR and XDR. I guess we're all supposed to say now as well, but.
Yeah.
But I think you said something important there, quick, and that is the XDR EDR story. It's like next gen stuff all the time. X means for every vendor something different, but it says something very important. EDR is very, very important. That's why everybody's jumping on the chip, and it's a good chip to be on, because it helps with not only with detecting but also with response action, because that's very important. The X is the other part. An EDR is only as good as the data that you collect from the rest of the network, in my opinion. So we need a good combination of network protection, EDR capabilities, and authentication. And when you correlate all those three things, you get very fast closer to things, because it brings you the behavior back, but it gives you also the capability to identify IP addresses. Where is this attack coming from? Is this known? So I can work with standard threat intelligence, the good old IOCs, indicators of compromise, file hashes, and all those things. So for the users that are not that versed, and then I can use the behaviors and all those things. Problem with EDR and correlating all those things is, and that's why you 100% right, why we need people, service providers, us probably, to run SOC services, because you need to triage those things. When I look about it, technically speaking, a small company has probably about 2 to 6 million security events a day, or security related events. They're not dangerous. When you then triage them, they're coming to an automated process of somewhere between 1,000 to 5,000 alerts. Out of them, maybe 2 or 3 a week are relevant, actual, actionable situations. If you expect a local IT guy to do that, it doesn't work. Automation is another part that lots of people forget. Yes, you can fix a lot with automation, but what we see more and more, and we similar like McAfee and everybody else, we have our own products, and by looking at them and using third-party products and everything else, the analysts that we employ are at the end the key for the really big things. They don't see that, and I've seen that in the past with any company that I worked with that is in cybersecurity and does more than just a product, but is involved with services. It's always an analyst or a technician that noticed something weird that at the end is the hero, because they found the next big 0 day, the next big thing that the other technologies can't do. And quantum computing hopefully will help us, but on the other side, because that was mentioned, is also the technology that will actually not help us. Because once the quantum computer is available to Russia, North Korea, and so on, those states that can afford to get something in place, I'm not talking now just necessarily about criminals, then they can break our encryption.
To the best of my knowledge, in all of the very high profile mainstream media attacks that have happened in the last number of years, there has always been at least one missed alert.
Yep.
Maybe that's a big statement, but to the best of my knowledge, there has always been one missed alert, and that's not to blame the women and men who are in the SOC, but it really probably reflects alert fatigue. A lot of the products generate, as you said, I forget the figure you mentioned, 5,000 alerts in a week or a day, and I guess really it behooves the people producing the products, people like me, I guess, to reduce the alert fatigue. But it also highlights the importance of having relevant skills in the SOC, so that you know how to tell the relevant stuff from the irrelevant stuff. And again, you know, the skills shortage, it's also, I mean, I'm just going to call it out, it's businesses not actually paying the dollars for their security people. You know, I mean, you know, it's businesses have to invest in their information security staff, in their cybersecurity staff, to make sure they're getting top quality people. Because, you know, the old adage is true. You know, pay peanuts and you know what you get. So that's a factor as well.
Just in terms of that, Dave, you know, often humans are the weakest link in the chain, and definitely in terms of the threat landscape, and you mentioned about training and campaigns, but what else can be done?
Apart from things like paying more for your cybersecurity staff, I mean, I think I always forget the correct term for these, the test phishing campaigns that are orchestrated by IT departments and SOCs. I think they're highly effective. And I mean, it's funny, I know myself, even though like I work in this space, when we started doing that, whatever, 2-3 years ago, you know, every couple of days we'll get a fake email, you know, like your Amazon package could not be delivered or whatever. I must admit that there were times when I came dangerously close to clicking on the link, so just failing to recognize, oh, wait a sec, you know, this is, and even a week ago, you know, it's the classic thing, you know, they know that around Black Friday, people buy stuff online and they're expecting it to be delivered. It's so easy to fall for that. And that's all, like everything, like every human endeavor, the more you practice, the better you get at it, you know. So it's vital that companies, you know, have campaigns to subject their staff to fake phishing mails and things like that. And
one thing you mentioned, Dave, as well, I think that the SOC kind of fatigue and so on, I think user fatigue with this stuff as well can be, like some organizations can bombard, like you say, if you're getting one of those every 2-3 days, and then what I would see kind of the gamification of some of that has been really important. And I think on the SOC piece as well, the increased awareness or just increased vigilance of organizations just generally around kind of reporting everything, but I think rewarding that. So building these things rather than a stick approach, it's the carrot approach that will become next. So we're building it into performance metrics and building it into bonuses and things like that, tying it to salary pack, tying security to your role is basically effectively plugging your salary into your role and making it a metric for how you perform as well. And for all users, I would hope that would be where we would see this going, that if you fail your security training, or if you have to repeat it 5 times because you're not passing the test at the end and so on, this should be rewarded at the end. Well, when you're positive results should be rewarded, and it should be built into bonuses and should be built into and that would promote good behavior. I think the stick approach isn't the right approach because people get fatigued with them. People get very negative about security. It's easy to get negative about security because it's often the blocker. But I think like we would kind of look to instill in the kind of assessments we do a proactive or kind of positive process to kind of build up security awareness and so on, to make it fun. And days of the kind of the boring 1 hour look, listen to this kind of automated thing about security, that's gone. You've seen like products like Proofpoint or Wombat and so on, and all of these kind of I suppose more interactive, gamified experiences, much more fun for end users, and short as well. So keep it short and kind of.
I think we're focusing very much at the endpoint, at the end user, and I think one part that we have to bring back is also the boardroom. It's very important that the owners of the companies, the key stakeholders, are aware and that they take responsibility, because at the end, as the owner of a company to go down to your IT guy that is already overworked and blame him for the last attack. That is the wrong thing to do. I think there's a big problem still to take ownership of cybersecurity in small companies, especially. I see often even large organizations only when it hits really badly or they had a very near miss where something could have gone really badly wrong, that they start working on things. And the worst thing of that is then the post-breach trauma that an organization hits. Everybody talks about the breach and the remediation. What happens after that? It's from witch hunts that we've seen in some areas to organizations just going mental and overspending on cybersecurity tools and just throwing them at the system, not configuring them. And that is all down to the fact that the board was never involved in cybersecurity. They never took the responsibility for the risk. So technically speaking, I've seen organization where this works really well is, for example, where the CFO is actually taking the charge of security also to some extent, because he has a CISO or somebody else under him that helps him with that, because then it becomes a business risk. And we need to translate our technical risk into something that is understandable for the people up there, because it's the most important. If they don't buy in, I can build the best things. If they don't buy in or override, oh, this person gets now access rights because I say so. All the work that I did is gone. And small organizations have a really hard time struggling with it, for example, because it's about policies, it's about run books, it's about testing and all those, for them, hideous things, but that actually show you how good or bad you are. And, oh, I don't want to bring those guys now in for this little test run that we're doing, you know, with this little role play, the tabletop exercise, and no, we don't bring them in, they're too busy. It's like, no, you're going to be too busy in 2-3 months down the road because you didn't get the budget to get the tools in. The processes are not aligned. Nobody knows what to do. You run around like headless chicken. We really, really have to have the conversation from the top to the bottom. Every single layer of the organization has to be involved. Otherwise, cybersecurity will always fail. That's the same like we had with IT 20 years ago. It was a complete different story than today. Today, when you discuss IT is a budget item. It's something where people talk about and they see the benefit out of it. Before it was a cost factor. And now we need to bring this conversation exactly to that point. Their risk is identified. We put a dollar sum against it, and companies acknowledge this is the cost that it will cost us if it goes wrong. And we don't have to talk about anymore. Will it happen? It will happen. It's just the question when every organization have to admit that. An organization that has a leadership doesn't accept this risk is a risk to themselves and is a risk to society because they hit their supply chain.
It is difficult. I think that that one is one we would come across a lot. The quantification in business terms of the value of cyber. It's very, very difficult because, like you say, it's always been a cost center. Like IT, it's always been a cost center. But actually putting it in business terms, the value of cybersecurity and the value of improving cybersecurity to reduce risk. That's where kind of to get the board buy-in and get the education into the board as well. We would always push organizations to have experienced people on the board that can challenge the cyber view, that can actually, when the cyber person, the CISO walks into the room and said, we spent X number on these 15 initiatives in the last year, and then challenge for the value, challenge for the prioritization, challenge for the risk mitigation, and so on. So having that power at the top of the board is absolutely invaluable, and particularly for driving. It's not just good enough to say we're investing 10%. So we assume 10% is average, or 10% of our IT team or security people, that's average, so we must be all right. The context is a huge thing, and the board and the business understand the context. The IT team may not, or the security team may not, they should, but generally you're absolutely correct. The top-down approach, and that's culture as well. So that will build that kind of that vigilant culture as well into an organization from what we've seen. So it's educating board and bringing boards up to speed on security, let alone technology, is a challenge. Do you know, it is no question it's a challenge, but it is absolutely invaluable.
Bringing a positive spin on this for a split second for people to understand how actually cybersecurity without being security can sometimes help an organization. For example, We see automation coming more and more into organizations. We help a lot of organizations with this these days. And an interesting part is, for example, and that is for the HR people probably interesting, is new hires and leavers. The amount of work normally a company needs to do manually to take everybody out of the systems, and we're not talking only about the PAM solutions and everything, but taking everybody out of the systems, cleaning laptops out and so on. With automation, you can reduce so much of paperwork. The paper trail that is happening already is like, oh, I have to open a ticket for this, I have to open a ticket, this. So I have 5 tickets open, I follow through with them, everything. I can do this all with one ticket, one approval, and then it gets an automated chain. And at the end, I just see in my ticket, my tick boxes that everything worked or where something went wrong, and I can deal with it. That reduces time extremely. So we've seen those processes improved by 50%. That means 50% of my IT people, my HR people, my finance people is freed up. So now cybersecurity, because the cybersecurity team says we need to automate this process to remove human error, to make sure that all the right systems are ticked. By doing this, we also do then the 2-3 other things that we need to do for the processes, for business processes. And more those things that we can automate, people moving between departments, giving new tools, applying new software, removing old software that is not needed. When we automate those things more and more, we're reducing the stress on all teams. And now we're coming to a point where cost is actually getting lower.
And that brings us nicely to our first question, which I think we've just answered in the last 5 minutes about what can be done in terms of user awareness. We mentioned the gamification, campaigns, building into performance metrics, making it part of the boardroom, making them take on responsibility and building it in as part of the culture. So I'm going to go to the next question that we've listed, because we've got a lot of questions and it'd be good to give time to answer all of those. So pre-attack detection, what more can be done here? So Dave, I think you're going to answer this one.
Yes, as soon as they come off mute. Actually, I had clicked the button in the window. I thought when I was saying I'd answer it, I was going to answer it in words rather than in written words rather than spoken words, but why not spoken words? I guess I wasn't entirely clear what was meant by pre-attack in the question, but I mean, if you think in terms of like the MITRE ATT&CK framework, right, which, I guess characterizes the stages of an attack, right? And I'm assuming the question related to, things like the reconnaissance, the initial access, all that type of thing. I mean, reconnaissance, a large part of that is often social engineering, information gathering, and I suppose, and we've all heard this a million times, but very often it's information that people have shared on social media is used. So greater awareness, spreading greater awareness amongst employees of the implications of sharing the type of information that they do sometimes on social media. And I don't even necessarily mean, fun social media like your Facebooks and Instagrams, but even on LinkedIn, people reveal information that's potentially useful from a social engineering perspective. And then we look at initial access, I guess, then in the early phases of an attack, I'm not a threat landscape expert, by the way, so the other guys might correct me on this, but to the best of my knowledge, the primary vector still nowadays is still email, right? Good old email. So again, it goes back to the building, instilling suspicion into the minds of employees when they get an email that is this legit? Is this really coming from my boss who's on holiday in Spain and using his personal email account to send me this message, or is it not? And all of that type of thing. So, but as I say, I wasn't entirely clear what the questioner meant by pre-attack, because I guess technically it's all part of the attack. But
and Deepak, from a risk management perspective, what can be done for pre-attack detection?
That's what I was coming in, Laura. Thanks. Apart from the user awareness, it's also like from the people. If we talk about we are just talking about the people, but there is an aspect of process and technology that needs to be there. It's security is a kind of onion ring layered approach where we are securing the end users by educating them, but we also have to look at the other mechanisms as well, like how strengthened we can look at from the technology side, how we can put in those controls at the email gateway level, because we all know that around 95 to 96% of attacks start from an email because someone has been phished or someone has clicked on that wrong URL that should not be clicked on because it could be a mistake, it could be a kind of an intuitive action, it could be due to any reason, because that's a user behavior and they tend to fall into those traps. But the other thing that organization could also look at do is when they click on those URLs, is there any way they can detect it before it gets worse? Or it could be blocked at certain level, could be your spam filter, could be your email security detection system, it could be all on those things, or could your email logs are fed into your SIEM solution, which can detect that unusual activities and kind of report it back to the SOC team, and they can take those actions. So it's kind of a combination of people, process, and what are the mitigating controls across each of these sites where we can detect these attacks as early as possible and then respond to that before they kind of go to the next stage where we are just trying to respond and recover from these attacks. So that's very important, and that's where the shift should be focused. So it's more of like security has to be shifted towards the left sorry, just to kind of make sure that we can detect all these attacks at an early stage rather than a later stage where things are out of the hand and we are trying to recover. And the other piece I would say is like organization do tend to kind of bring up a lot of technologies as well. Automation is there, but the focus should also be there. Can we kind of customize, or I would say not customize, but tailor these technology, like we spoke about EDR, email gateway, to the business, so that at the board level as well, even if they are risk aware, are they impact aware of those threats that are kind of coming in right now, and what could be the impact? That's the focus now, which has to be shifted on.
Yeah, when you talk about the initial attack, clicking on a link in an email, and again, that's where the relevance of folks working from home comes into play a lot as well. Like, I mean, when we're all in an office, if we click on a bad link in an email, we're going to have to pass through a web gateway, and with a bit of luck, there will be some sort of security protection in the web gateway. And there's that security. When employees are working from home, even if they have the VPN brought up to talk to their corporate systems, a lot of organizations will use what's called a split tunnel, which means that only the traffic that needs to go to your employer's network will go through the VPN. Everything else will go directly. So when you click on a mail in a link in an email, chances are that's just going straight out on the internet. You don't have that security of passing through the company's web gateway. So unless you have local protection on the endpoint, or unless your employer is using a security product which essentially tunnels your public internet traffic through a web gateway as well, then there's not a whole lot of protection there. So again, it's important to look at have I deployed security extensions or plugins to the browsers that my employees are using? Is there good detection? I mean, a lot of the cybersecurity companies have developed. I mean, as humans, we can look at a URL very often, and we can just instinctively know as intelligent humans, oh, that looks dodgy. That doesn't look legit, right? But it turns out you can actually train an ML model pretty well nowadays to actually recognize a bad link just by the look of it, right? Because a good ML model, and I know that there has been a lot of success in doing that. So again, ensuring that your security products have these type of technologies in them, it can offer a lot of protection. It's not perfect, nothing ever is, but as you mentioned, Deepak, these things are layered. So education of your users, and then is I guess the outermost layer, and then next is having protections on the endpoint to block malicious links at source and all of that type of thing. It's definitely layered.
So as much I would like to add on to this, because there's DNS protection, there's spam, there's so many other things. There's a very important question here on the screen, and that is about the internal threats, insider threats. Do we still see them? And a big yes has to be thrown out there. Best example, everybody might have, or not everybody, most people might seen this in the last few months. Tesla. An employee of Tesla was offered $1 million to introduce malicious code into Tesla. So bypassing all the security, more or less. Luckily, this was a loyal employee that says, no, I like Elon and I don't want him to suffer, which was good. But think about how many disgruntled people, and as large as the organization gets, as fast as it goes in that direction, or misunderstood people that are feeling overworked or not heard in an organization. If in the right moment, the right person approaches them, there is a chance that they get actually moved to do something stupid. That's a very important thing that we have to understand. Insider threats are there. Insider threats can be accidental also, by misknowledge and so on. And it's very important to understand what you said, is there is no silver bullets in cybersecurity. I have a study on phishing, for example, and it's a very simple example. If you look at it, even organizations that have multi-layered security levels in with mail gateways and so on. It's about 15,000 seats in an organization reports, if they have a reporting capability for phishing built into their organization, which we help often with, report about 150 to 200 emails a month as potential phishing. Out of that are only 2% weaponized. The rest is spam, a little bit unwanted thing. But those 2%, out of that is 1% that's highly targeted. And those things are the problem. So when we're taking an attack vector of, let's say 80% only, not 90, because it depends which statistics you look up. So let's say 80% of all attacks originating in phishing, then only a minute fraction of that gets actually through, because the tools are protecting it. But this less than 1% is a dangerous part. That's where, again, things like enablement come in place. Things to make sure that employees are happy is very important, because unhappy employees get distracted. What the heck is this again? They click on it, bingo. And then it doesn't have to be malicious code. That's what people misunderstand. If it's a well-faked website on a URL that is not blacklisted because it's an IP address on Amazon and so on, then we get into the point where people enter credentials. And that brings it back to the second most dangerous part. Every single successful ransomware attack has credentials. Somewhere the credentials come from, somewhere the access elevation comes in. I have now higher rights. I can admin into systems. Endpoint administrators should be not existing as local admins anymore for the workforce outside there. Very practical tip: remove local admins. And that's a dangerous part, really. What we see is mistakes, insider threats based on people being not happy or being overworked and stressed out and fatigued about what they're doing, and they just click accidentally on it.
And sharing the fact that they're unhappy on Facebook.
Oh yeah,
going back to that, right? I mean, because if employees are targeted, it's
exactly.
I imagine it's quite easy to identify a disgruntled employee, by what they're sharing on Facebook.
And that's it. But what I actually wanted to answer, because I brought it up, or we brought it up together, there was a question about guardrails and how organizations can help. And I make a bet each of the organizations here on the call have actually internships. We do that, and we bring interns. Now, our organization is not as big that I could afford to bring 20 interns in, but we bring interns in and we help them, and we show them how we work. We explain to them what knowledge they need to progress in their career. I'm going hopefully somewhere in January to UCC to 2 courses in cybersecurity. They're more around psychology and so on. I'm trying to explain actually why people are not getting even placed in internship, because they're just doing their curriculum on the course, but they're not taking the bits and pieces that they learn and try them out and fire up a computer and really work with it. Now, when most of us have come into IT, we came in IT most likely lucky enough because we did it as a hobby. At least the older folks of us, because it was just something that fascinated us and that built up this knowledge. you have to have this fascination about that. And the same is for the people that want to jump from IT to cyber.
Yeah.
Think twice about it.
I think there's a really good point there. I suppose the question was, what can third party or third level students do to learn more about IT? I think it's actually on the universities doing IT or application development courses to build cyber in as a module. Yeah. I can't understand how an application developer can walk out of with a degree and not have done a module in OWASP, the top 10, on how to secure applications. So there's like security, we always say it's a mantra, is an organizational responsibility. How isn't security built into most courses and every technology course, irrespective of the discipline, should have security built in as a module? Then I think for organizations like ourselves and consultancy, we're not looking for, I suppose, more generalists. We're looking for technology specialists that have chosen to specialize in security for a particular field. And that's the best, I suppose, the best way to do it really. And universities really need to pick up on this in a big way to deploy security. Yes, security as a specialism, as a single course is an excellent idea, but deploying security or modules to improve security across their technology disciplines and even beyond will really bring everyone up, I think is my view. And then you're absolutely right, Andy. I think internships and so on, and even rotating in technology. So we sit in technology consulting, cyber, and we would rotate some of our grads from other disciplines into cyber and back out again to give them good exposure to what we do. And us from our team, we gain their knowledge from what they do as well. So it's interdisciplinary. No, excellent point.
I think there's a very important thing also to bring back to the students a little bit in my mind. Because it is an easy thing to say, oh, I do this course, now I'm prepared. And everybody should understand. I mean, you go to college, you go to university, it gives you a knowledge, a vector of knowledge. Experience is a very important thing. And you can build up experience by maybe trying to get a part-time job in an area that is related to what you do, by buying an online course or even do free online courses and try things out, build a mini lab. And now you don't have to buy an expensive computer, 2-3 Raspberry Pis, or something similar, or two old laptops that you get for cheap on Amazon, and you can build a mini lab. And you can try things out without, because we cannot just unmap the whole internet and play vigilante there. That is steps that I miss a lot. How many people come in and call themselves Linux administrators, and they cannot even run their own laptop, literally. That's a problem, because people really, and I think there is our society comes to a point where common sense and self-responsibility is taken away from people too much. Oh, we teach you everything, we explain to you everything. No, you have a responsibility in your life. You have a responsibility for your cybersecurity of your company. When you cross the road, you look left and right. Why don't people do that when they look at their emails? That's my sense here.
I'm looking at the clock, and I'm sure Laura's going to jump in any second. And as we're all talking, including myself, I'm realizing that we're perhaps characterizing a lot of this in a very negative way, right? Employees aren't doing this, employers aren't doing this, CFOs aren't doing this. But maybe there's another way to think about it, like to finish on a positive, which is that to think about the fact that they can do it, that like there are excellent tools out there. There are excellent security products out there. Obviously ours are the best. I'm joking, but there are excellent products and services out there. There are fantastic MSSPs out there. And it's really about just to sort of conscious of the time of year and everything as well, just to sort of try and finish on a positive. I think we are in a challenging time as regards cybersecurity, and will be for probably for the several decades, but we can get better at doing it, and it's just a matter of investing the time and the money. It will require money, but to make it better. I mean, if I didn't believe that, I wouldn't be doing what I do. I do what I do because I believe that we can actually make a difference. We can make our products better. We can keep our customers safer. I just wanted to mention that before we kind of wrap up.
Yeah, and if you say that, I think it's a good testimony to all of our organizations here on the call. How many of our customers are actually safe and safer because they work with us together using the right technologies? And how many of those where we see that got into trouble and over the years gotten better. That's a very important thing. And I can say that clearly when people make the right choices and start the cybersecurity maturity roadmap and make it something that they do with the organization, when they buy in, it's not doom and gloom only.
Absolutely.
And you're 100% right. And we because we're so passionate, we're always trying, of course, to make people aware, but also a very big shout out to all our customers and on your customers that doing the right thing. You guys are awesome.
Thanks, guys. I know we could talk all day, but unfortunately our hour is up. So I'd like to say a special thank you to our panelists for their valuable contributions today. So thank you, Ross, Andy, Dave, and Deepak for your passion, expertise, and of course the difference that you and your organizations make in the world of cybersecurity. I'd also like to thank our sponsors again, Ernst & Young. Without our sponsors, many of these events would not be possible. Thank you to our audience for great questions raised. We look forward to seeing you at our next event. So thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.